timetable, and we are thankful that you accommodated our changes in schedule this morning. So before the panel comes up, what I would like to do is, yesterday I talked about one of our stalwarts, our rocks, and our guiding lights on our board of directors, Arun Kumar, who came up and introduced the CEO panel. Today, I would like to bring up another one of our board members who has equally been a staunch supporter and a guide for us here in India from Pune. Please welcome Rajan Navani.
Thanks, Sanjeev, and again, a very good morning to all of you. And I must compliment and thank each one of you for being here. But as we, get off a conversation which has been so touching about how we are going to shape the future of India, I think the purpose of Indiaspora and the formation really is what comes to mind. I still remember the day when MR and we really conceived this idea a decade ago. And we've come such a long way from then. I must congratulate MR, Sanjeev, Shri, and the entire Indiaspora team for really bringing such a exciting group of people here to India, engaged deeply with India. But more importantly, I think it has been a journey. There have been occasions around Republic Day when President Obama came, and I remember the first time Indiaspora made a little mark in India. But over these years, I think the deeper engagement that Indiaspora and members of the diaspora are going to make with India and the country is probably just beginning. Pretty much like this journey for India, I think we are here on our 75th year, and I think as a country we've achieved a lot. The diaspora role in making that happen has also been very significant, and we'll talk a little bit about that later this evening as well. But more importantly, it is how do we and where do we go from here? I think it is the journey of the India at 75, moving to India at 100. Not only a 75 years of independence, but thousands of years of culture. How do we unlock exponentially that potential over the next 25 years? Prime Minister Modi calls it the Amrit Kal. I think all of us believe that there is an opportunity here for us to collectively put our beaks together, as Kailashji mentioned, and put our drops to collectively make this change happen. And I think to do that, we have some of the brightest minds of Indian origin globally, our think tanks, people who have shaped and contributed so much to what we are here today, but also will re-energize the people of India to see and think together. When we see a 19-year-old winning a gold medal in the weightlifting at the Commonwealth Games, or 4 women really winning a gold medal in lawn bowls. I don't think most of us even know what that sport is. It unites India, especially our youth and our women, who are going to drive that future. And it is to discuss how to make that happen. We have a very eminent panel, led by Manjeet Kripalani, who is not only an eminent journalist, but also the founder of Gateway House here in India, and a very distinguished panel of Yamini, Aiyar, Rakesh, Mohan, and Vikram Singh. So, Manjeet, may I invite you to please come here and take over the discussion for the future of India, India at 100. May I also invite the panelists to please join.
So friends, we have breakout sessions coming up at 11 o'clock per the schedule. And I just want to announce that we will ask you to take your coffee and go to the breakout sessions because we are running behind schedule and we want to get back on track. So after this panel, we have another eminent person coming up to speak. He's on your agenda, Ashish Dhawan. But after that, I'll request you to take your coffee and proceed directly to the breakout rooms. Thank you. Manjeet, it's over to you now.
Thank you very much. It's kind of hard to follow Kailash Satyarthi, but he talked about building the future of children, and we're going to be talking about building India's intellectual capacity, because without intellectual growth and independence, we won't have a future. So we have a wonderful panel with us, and India at 100, my God, we're getting to that mark. So I'm going to start with very quick sort of rapid fire questions before we go into our actual questions. We've got 40 minutes, right? So we're going to keep this going. Do we have a mic for everyone, or are we going to share?
I think we're sharing two and two,
Okay.
so you guys are...
So I'm going to start with Rakesh, and I'm going to give you the mic in a minute. Rakesh, India in 2047 will be a middle power, slight improvement over status quo, rising power, great power, leading power. Just 2 words.
It'll be more than 2 words. The first is that by 2047, Kailash Satyarthi should have no work, in the sense there should be no children of the kind that he described who need to be rescued. I hope that happens much before that he's 93 in 2047. I don't like to think in terms of power, but I think that we should be at least a high middle income country.
Okay, Yamini, for you. Will India have a high income country? Yamini, high happiness index, struggles dominate, dissatisfaction, will we be in the middle?
We should certainly aspire to a very high happiness index. But to get there, we need to ensure that all children of India that reach in 2047 see a real future for themselves in India with real economic participation.
Okay. And Vikram, will the world learn the India way, the China way, the Western way, another way?
I sincerely hope we learn another way, a new way for the 21st century. There's something different ahead of us. It could be good or it could be bad, but I'm hoping another way will be good.
Okay. Rakesh, for you again. Mixed, uneven economy, turbocharged economy, overtaking China and the US, middle income, trapped economy.
Mixed up turbocharged economy. There's little chance, as of now, of course, one can never tell the future, but there's little chance of our overtaking US or China by 2047, although we should aspire to do so.
And Yamini, will our dominant strand be spiritualism, Hinduism, multi-religion, ghettoed?
If we want to be a global superpower, our dominant strand has to be multi-religion, multicultural, diverse, and proud of that diversity.
And lastly for you, Vikram, environmentally damaged, climate controlled, or cement jungle?
Wait, what?
Environmentally damaged, will we be climate controlled, or will we be a cement jungle?
Well, I don't think we'll be a cement jungle, but I think we will be environmentally damaged and trying to figure out still how to get a grip on the climate crisis.
Okay, all right. So let's go into the question answer right away. We'll try and keep the answers short, and I'm going to start with you, Rakesh. In 2047, what India would you like to see economically?
First, as I said earlier, we are likely to be a high middle income country, and what does that mean? These are very prosaic numbers which you might get very bored of, but our per capita income now is about 2,300 or so, this current US dollars, at the same prices. Even if we double per capita income every 10 years or so, that is 7% growth, we will reach somewhere near 12,000 to 15,000 at best. But what does that really mean? It really means, first, no poverty, zero poverty. That is number one. What does that mean? 100% literacy. We are at about, almost 25% of people are still illiterate. I'm not talking about the people who are literate, who are barely literate. At the other end, we should have at least 10 to 20 universities, the top 100 in the world. There are none now. We have, in principle, achieved 100% primary school education, attendance rather, enrollment. What they get there, we don't quite know. Secondary school gross enrollment ratio is still only about 75%. We need to get to 100% much before 2047. Tertiary education, actually a huge change has taken place. The gross enrollment ratio in higher education was only 6% in 1990. It has reached something like 30%. So, these are real numbers. And so if we aspire to say half our children going up to university or college level by 2047, it's not an outrageous idea. And so these are the minimum we need to do. In addition, of course, we need to think about quality rather than just quantity. Because we have, I think, the last 30 years done a great deal of improvement in quantity, and we have to focus on quality so that we are then no longer afraid of being of getting PISA scores comparable to other countries. Also most important is healthcare. Again, to give you some numbers, infant mortality is still 30 per thousand. We should reach at least 5, if not lower, per thousand. Life expectancy is doing quite well, around 70. We should reach around 75, 80. But most distressing, and this is connected to literacy, it's connected to health, it's connected to everything that Kailash Satyarthi was talking about. We have the most unfortunate number, about 35% of children being stunted today. 35% are stunted today. That should be near zero by 2047. And that basically means much more nutrition, which also means clean water and sanitation. And apart from that, of course, affordable and universal healthcare. India does have the lowest government expenditure on health as a percent of GDP in the world, and the highest out-of-pocket expenditures. Tell me when to stop, because I can go on for most of the day. So, we have made, in all these things, we made progress. I'm not saying nothing has been done. Of course, we made a lot of progress, especially in the last 30 years. So the biggest failure since independence for 75 has indeed been on health and education. This is why I'm talking more about this. Now to go on to somewhat more other economic indicators, the biggest disappointment in some sense in the last 30 years since the economic reforms began is manufacturing. By 2047, we should be the factory of the world. We should be the factory of the world. And our share of manufactured exports now is around 4% or so in the world. Sorry, 2% or so in the world. Just our share of manufactured exports in the world is only 2%. It should go up to at least 15% by 2047. Now that is a big ask compared to where we are today. And correspondingly, employment, because one of the key problems of employment today are indeed to do, is the key problems of the economy are to do with employment. And there was a figure released in the parliament the other day that over the last 5 or 7 years, around 220 million people have applied for less than a million, much less than a million government jobs. And that gives us an idea of the employment problem. Now, to do all this, as I said, you have to have 7% minimum growth. So these are achievable numbers. And finally, Manjeet, energy, that we must have more than 80% renewable energy by that time. And a lot of things I've said won't happen unless we really give our attention to climate change, the pollution that we all suffer in the cities that we live in. So these are, and particularly in climate change, there needs to be a much greater focus than we have today.
Thank you. That's a vision in itself, and maybe it deserves an article, Rakesh, next week in the papers. Yamini, how do you envision India in 2047?
Thanks. I agree with everything that Rakesh just said. So let me take it a step more granular to ask the question of how we need to get there. And this is not an easy question to answer because I think we are very much locked into the most vicious of traps in two ways. One, that while we unleash the animal spirits of the market, that in no small measure significantly benefited everyone in this room and everyone on this stage, we did not concomitantly build our capacities to ensure that all those who can't enter this room also could live in the possibility of entering this room, perhaps not in their generation, but certainly for their children. We simply did not invest in the sense that while all of us got the benefits of this expanded market, we expanded our education system, as Rakesh rightly said. More children than ever before today have access to a school and are going to school. Most importantly, more girl children today than ever before since 1947 have access to school and are going to school. These are very impressive numbers. But while we grew our economy on the back of services, we did not pay attention to what was happening in the classroom. So today, 50% of children that finish 5 years of schooling, year after year after year, can barely read a class 2 textbook. And then we kept schools closed in India for 2 years, so it's possible that those numbers are even worse. So the first challenge that we confront is how do we break out of this vicious cycle where the unleashed powers of the market are so far benefiting the top 1%, but in fact they have to benefit all of India. The second big challenge that we confront is that we are at the tipping point of a demographic dividend, which is converting into a demographic ticking time bomb. The reason being that our pathways of economic growth have not worked out how to make markets work for all. They have worked out how to make markets work for all of us here and improved our lives. And so even in the peak growth years, we were able to generate a large number of jobs and pull people out of agriculture, which is how you transform economies. But we generated those jobs in informal construction and informal small micro enterprises. How do you convert these informal precarious jobs into real quality jobs is the second trap that we have to exit from. All of this requires, I think, for us to have a very different imagination of our economy. In that, what are now the levers that will spur growth? For decades, especially in the 1990s and through the last the two decades of the 2000s too, we've had this consistent argument in policy circles about whether India should concentrate on growth or should concentrate on welfare. We position these as trade-offs. Investing in schools, investing in health, investing in social protection, social insurance, those are luxuries that you get after growth, not levers that propel growth. The silver lining today, especially after COVID, is that all would agree there is no trade-off. These investments are constitutive of growth. But because we fail to invest in these, we've also been completely disenchanted with the capability of the Indian state, our public administration, our public systems, to deliver on these. So the third critical challenge that we face in terms of paths of progress are that we simply don't believe that the Indian state is capable to do these things. All of us here, me certainly with young children, are moving into the private sector because we have the means to do so. But we are not thinking of the vast majority who are now sending their children to mediocre, poor quality schools because we don't believe that the government can actually provide them. So that's the third trap. How do we get out of these? I think first and foremost, we need to reimagine what it means to build infrastructure for India. We've built highways, we've built, we aspire to bullet trains. All of those are really good things to do. However, the vast majority of India moves from villages into small towns in search of work. We haven't very effectively built infrastructure and capacities to get them to even basic mobility remains a significant challenge. One of the reasons why India boasts of and I say boast with full sarcasm, of having a female labor force participation rate about the same level as Saudi Arabia is because we haven't been able to invest in safe transportation and safe work environments for women. So those who have the option not to work out of distress are choosing not to work because they can't find jobs that are capable of ensuring their safety. That's the potential that we have failed to unleash, and that's the potential that we need to unleash. We have always imagined, rightly so, that growth will come in cities. But we haven't thought about how the two, rural India and urban India, are actually a continuum. COVID reminded us of that. People come to cities for jobs, but these are precarious jobs because we haven't invested in housing, we haven't invested in safety nets. The minute things go wrong, they move back to the farms, they move back to rural India. And we didn't even have the ability to provide them means to go back to rural India. We have an urban ministry, we have a rural ministry. We think of these things as two completely separate things. But in fact, it's a continuum. If you want to invest in urban India, you need to invest in where India is urbanizing, which is actually in rural India. Rural India is converting into urban India, and that means that the infrastructure we need to build are not just the highways connecting Delhi to Bombay, but the roads that will connect the rural almost city to the bigger town where work happens. So reimagining the process of growth in our cities is a second challenge that is a second path that we have to build. Third and most important, stop looking for answers to building human capital in education and health outside of the state. And certainly not, although I believe in the power of technology, but no amount of education technology is going to solve the basic infrastructure that you need to build inside schools, inside classrooms, inside health centers. This means we have to put money where money needs to be. So put money into health, put money into education. It also means that we have to start demanding good quality education and health from our state, from our politicians. And for that, as a citizenry, we need to start re-believing that the state can do it if we push it to. The Indian state has achieved huge progress in 75 years. It now has the even harder task of building on that progress. It will only build on it when we as citizens start believing in it and demanding it.
And I'm going to come back to you on the role of the private sector. But before that, Vikram, you have a unique view. You know, we're all here. We're insiders, but what kind of India would you like to see in 2047?
Well, thank you, Manjeet and Rakesh, Yamini. It's so great to be here, and thank you, MR, and everyone for the invitation. I'm the only diaspora on the stage, so I'm the sole American in this case. In diaspora has gone global, as everybody knows. What's really interesting is both what Rakesh and Yamini were saying regarding India is basically the same conversations happening in America, right? What do we do to bring back manufacturing? How do we ensure equitable growth rather than just the top 1% benefiting from new technologies and innovation? How do we ensure decent education so that people go through schooling and actually are prepared for entering the workforce? These are all the same problems in the United States, the same challenges, even in the highest income country. And so we're facing a really interesting moment, which is that we have to pivot to something new. So what would I want to see? I'll take one look is basically to say what I want to see for India is very similar to what I want to see for America, very similar to what I want to see for my country. I want to see broad-based prosperity. Not this increasing divide, which I think is becoming politically unsustainable and actually threatening the fabric of democracy itself in the medium to long term. You know, democracies age like people or buildings. They get, they need to be nurtured and sustained. And when those tensions or problems are untreated, you end up with either democracies turning autocratic, as we've seen with a lot of countries are getting more autocratic, or democracies simply break down, and you get extreme polarization and kind of an inability to do all the common sense things that people talk about, like make the investments in health and education, because the politics has become too divisive. So for us in the United States, to step away from inside and to look at India's position in the region and the world. I mean, we look at India as a critical partner for shaping the 21st century. I don't think there's any American political leader who really sees a successful global efforts to deal with global challenges, be it climate change, be it the rise of China, without having a successful India as a strong partner. And the specifics of that are less important than the general trajectory. In a general trajectory, India needs broad prosperity so that it can be an effective partner, because without that, it can't step up into the roles that we would hope to see India take. It needs to be, ideally, it could be at peace with its neighbors, but if not, it needs to be in a position of strength so it can maintain stability with its neighbors, deter aggression from China, manage threats of terrorism emanating from Pakistan or elsewhere in the region, Afghanistan at this point. That means that we want to see India with the economic, the political, the military power to be a strong partner. And just like we want for the United States, we want India and the United States to both be leading democracies. And that requires us, again, to make it a little human, it requires our democracies to have a degree of inner peace, that we are able to work with each other, overcome differences, celebrate the diversity of people, faiths, and everything that make up our complex democracies, and not allow those divisions to turn into things that pull us apart. So we need to have a stable Indian democracy and a stable American democracy to be effective partners.
So how can the US-India partnership travel this road, this geo-economic and geopolitical road? What are we doing now? What are we putting in place now that will pay us dividends in 25 years?
Wow. So how can we partner? So I get to keep talking. Thank you. I keep thinking that there's a lot of talk about the Quad, and if you look at the Quad's agenda, it really is what the bilateral U.S.-India agenda should also be. The valuable thing about how the Quad has been structured, that's the partnership between Australia, Japan, the United States, and India, if anyone's not tracking Quad lingo, is it's focused on an affirmative agenda. It's not against something. It's not we're just against terrorism or trying to contain China. It's about what we're doing together as four countries. And the agenda happens to be what I think is the right core agenda for the US and India. There's a focus on critical technology. So partnering with India and the United States on space and cyber and artificial intelligence and quantum technologies, machine learning. The reason for that is both functional, that we will do much better working together because we have a talent pool in India and we have capacity in India and innovation that can be harnessed to actually advance these technologies, but also because working together, we will ideally be setting the standards for how these technologies are used in society in ways that help with broadening prosperity and stability and all of the other things I was talking about earlier. So critical technology, global health. How do you deal with health? Not just pandemic response, which the US and India have partnered on, but how do you deal with health in sub-Saharan Africa? How do you deal? I think the US and India, again, India's pharmaceutical capabilities, America's capital deployment, there are a lot of potential areas in that. That's another Quad area. Climate, both the resilience and the actually dealing with the climate challenge in terms of emissions. Infrastructure, and I think it's those are the affirmative areas in which we have to cooperate, and that part of that manufacturing base we want to build will be done by joint investments. Building a manufacturing base in India that also helps with building the industrial economy back in America. There have to be ways we can do it together.
And hopefully the US will learn to wean itself away from China. I'm going to come to you in a second, but Yamini, you wanted to interject.
Yeah, just to add two things. One for India to think about, and one for maybe building a deeper India-US relationship. For India to think about, both in terms of our strategic partnership with the US, which has always been anchored in at least an imagination of a value-based partnership, and also for our relationship with the globe and our aspirations to be global power leaders, that India has always pulled above her weight since 1947 because we led by the power of example. And the power of our example came in the form of our commitment to democracy, our ability to have proved the world wrong in these 75 years, because in 1947, no one believed that this democracy would actually survive, our commitment to the principles of a liberal constitution, and our commitment to inclusivity, diversity, and equality. Each of these today are in a fairly precarious position. So if we genuinely want to build global leadership, we also domestically need to remember that our role in the world was anchored on our leadership by example. That example has to stay strong, and that will always be the foundation of a Indo-US strategic alliance. The second more practical thing, one of the most important lessons out of COVID is how fragile multilateralism actually is. All our global institutions, including, I believe, the WHO, played a fairly complicated role through this phase, and one that didn't actually stand up for the cause of equity in the globe. The vaccine inequality story, which India, by virtue of our own capacities and capabilities, has avoided, but many other parts of the developing country are confronting, is only one such example of the limitations of multilateralism as it exists. I think there is a huge opportunity, and climate presents us with this. The common but differentiated framework of the climate agreements are an opportunity to think about this more in other aspects of global public goods, to reimagine and make more equitable the multilateral relationship that pushes for global equity. And here I think the India-US coming together can be extremely powerful, because US leadership has played a central role in shaping the nature and form of multilateralism in India today. US leadership itself today, for domestic reasons in the US, is also fragile. But here's an opportunity for us to work together to really change the global rules of the game. Can we do it, is the question.
Thank you. And Rakesh, how are we going to get there? We can talk about policy tools and bureaucracy and trade agreements and business, but most importantly, what is the private sector? What should they do, and how should they move forward? There's a lot of talk about the state, but what can business really do? Because they've kind of taken a back seat in the last 10 years.
Well, first, let me say that what we really need to do and how to get there has been stated much more eloquently by Yamini. And it's kind of uninteresting to say we agree with everything. And so I'm very disappointed I can't find anything to disagree with you, Yamini, because you stated everything that I wanted to say much, much more eloquently. In fact, on the question that you're posing, the principal kind of reasoning for the 91 reforms, the last 30 years of reforms, has been to get the government out of the hair of business and to empower the business, the private sector, to do what they can do best, to their best of abilities. So I'm not really answering a question, Manjeet, I'm saying almost the opposite. That, as Amini said, that what we have not done is to empower the public sector. I don't mean public sector enterprises, I mean public sector broadly defined, that is government at all levels, the central government, the state government. What we've not mentioned is local governments. It was Yamini's father who authored, or your father fathered the 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Constitution, which gave finally a constitutional recognition of urban local bodies. And one of the things we've not done at all is to strengthen local governance. And that is something that we need to do. The budgets of many of the large cities of India are larger than some of the countries in the world, some of the states in India also, but almost no competence, almost no competence. I once gave a talk at a seminar in Mumbai, I think about 15 years ago, thereabouts. And there were about, I think, 500 students. And I asked them, how many of you want to work for the Mumbai Municipal Corporation? The, was it Briha Mumbai Municipal Corporation, right? 2 hands went up. Out of the 500 or so students, Mr. Narayan Murthy was in the same panel as I was, and I asked them, how many of you would like to work for Mr. Narayan Murthy and all the things that he does? 400 hands went up. So my point is that one of the things we need to do in terms of process, because what is hampering the private sector today is actually the inability of the government to facilitate what the private sector can do. And so one of the most important ways to get to where we want to get, what I described in the beginning, is indeed to empower the government to do what it must do. That is the delivery of public goods and services. As I said in the beginning, our biggest failure has been health, education, nutrition. And Yamini, yes, that it is not, there's no trade-off between growth and these services. So what we really need to do is, number one, have a primary and overarching focus on growth, but that means primary and overarching focus on health, nutrition, and education at all levels. I'll move from that a little bit to say that one of the things of the private sector that is not, when we did the reforms in 1991, we thought that as we were moving on the constraints of the private sector and we were going to have much more competition, both domestic and foreign, that the private sector will then do much more innovation, investment in R&D and so on. The unfortunate fact is that the investment in R&D from the private sector hasn't gone up at all in the last 30 years. So one of the things the private sector has to do is to have much, much, much greater investment in R&D. Even in IT firms, look at their balance sheets, hardly have any investment in R&D, and if you look at the comparators in the United States, Silicon Valley, from where many of you come from, it's always some percentage, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% of their turnover in R&D. In IT firms, most of them, last I looked, was less than 1%. And so I'll use a term that Nehru used to use, which was scientific temper. We need to bring back the scientific temper into India at all levels, primary school level, secondary school level, higher education, private sector firms, the government itself. We have a major technocratic gap at all levels of government, as I said, especially the urban governance. My first 10 years of professional work was indeed in urban development. When I first came back to India in 1981, I worked for 3 years in urban development. I gave that up because no one was interested. I was 40 years before time. Now, of course, that is much more important. Let me just end by giving, again, since my favorite thing is giving numbers, as you will have seen, that when people get very shocked when I talk about empowering government, because 30 years ago, when I was involved in the reforms process, I used to say the opposite. Let me give you some numbers, talking about the United States. Would you know that the total number of federal employees, not state and local, is over 8 per 1,000 of population in the United States. In India, it's 1.6. So we are not over-governed. And you can see that in every newspaper they read every day in terms of how we are being governed. Between 1990 and 2011, when the population increased by 40%, total government employment fell by 5%. That's why there are millions of people applying for government jobs. Even IAS and IPS, the top of the bureaucracy, the size fell by 10%. Again, that is why we have a shortage of people. We know all the shortages of judges and judicial officers. People can't get justice. There are 30 million cases pending, 10 million for more than 10 years. Every day you read about judgments about something that happened 30 years ago. And you know, all the people have died by then, those who were seeking justice. Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to do. Obviously, I have not been making myself clear when Manjeet again asking me, how do we get to 2047? This is exactly, we need to strengthen all these institutions. We have to, again, make government public service Public service means government, means local government, also NGOs. I'm not excluding them at all. We have to make that much more respectable today, because the way I used to put it is that 40 years ago, if you ask someone where do you work, and someone works for the government, is I work for the government. Today, you ask them where do you work, if they're in government, oh, I work for the government. You know, if they
That's
work,
happened in the United States too. The prestige of the civil service or the foreign service has definitely gone down. But the need for it to be competent is actually growing, because the challenges we're dealing with are much more complicated than they used to be. And without competent government bureaucracies, you can't have a modern functioning society. And we're having that's actually becomes a problem. And then faith in government goes down, so investment in government goes down, and that becomes a downward spiral, which is really, really dangerous. I just wanted to hit on the...
Just one interruption, if you don't mind. Again, referring to Yamini, you talked about transportation and safety for women. You know how many people work for the U.S. Department of Transportation?
No idea.
60,000.
Sounds about right.
That's why you have safety, concerned safety, and all the agencies. So I thought I would just, I'm
Right.
correcting this impression that we have too much bureaucracy, okay? But 60,000 with high levels of competence. The Reserve Bank of India has only about 7,500 professional employees. US Fed has 22,000. And Indian Reserve Bank employment, I used to be there, so I know this, has fallen from about 10,000 to 7,500, when the financial sector expanded like mad. And then we keep talking, why aren't they regulating? Why aren't they regulating, you know?
Now, the thing I wanted, your points are well taken, but we are diminishing ours, not investing in it necessarily. So I hope we will keep having a competent government. You know, the pieces that really work, like the National Transportation Safety Board, everyone trusts, but the parts of the government that people trust is going down dramatically. No, I wanted to hit on R&D. Our two governments announced a partnership, I think in something like 6 in high technology innovation hubs. And the R&D issue is not just critical for each country independently, but we have to partner on it. Because right now, China has actually begun to outpace the United States on both public sector and increasingly private sector R&D. So it's a really important point.
Actually, a very good point, because there are far more MNCs, I think more than like 100, if I'm not mistaken, I may have got the number wrong, who have R&D centers in India, more than Indian companies. So they know, the foreign MNCs know that their skills are here. So they're setting up huge R&D centers here. Unlike, so that's a major area for cooperation, actually.
So just a quick two-finger, I completely agree. We don't have enough people in government. We need to, there's no question, the Indian state is too thin. It needs to be thickened just by getting more people in. But the other phenomenon that is unfolding in especially something that I've noticed in the last decade more than before, as the nature of the policy challenge is shifting more to state governments, the complete failure to invest in the capacities, by which I mean the skill sets, the accountabilities of state cadres and local cadres, has meant that the powerful Indian Administrative Service has looked to the big 4 companies to fill this gap. You see PricewaterhouseCoopers, BCG, McKinsey, the works, all running the Indian state. They are the ones who are making the PowerPoint presentations that go off in our international fora. And that, while it may fill a temporary gap, is a huge, huge challenge that needs to be solved. You cannot get away from the challenge of state capacity by outsourcing administration. The second critical thing that I wanted to also add here is that even as we are sort of thinking about how we want to build state capacity, as Rakesh said, the local government story remains central, but there's also the challenge that in the 21st century, what the state needs to do looks very different to what the state needed to do in the 19th century. We've not forgotten, or the 20th century, we've not resolved those problems. We still need to do health and education, but we now need to think about climate, we need to think about renewables, we need to think about urbanization, not as urbanization around manufacturing hubs as the US did, but in a very different trajectory, because it has to be now more sustainable, environment, etc. All of this requires a very different kind of economic growth trajectory. And I don't know that any of us, certainly here, have good answers to this. These are big questions the globe is grappling with. These are big questions for India. To find these answers, we need to invest in ideas, and we need to invest in our intellectual capacity. That means that we need to start putting more money into the intellectual class and the scientific temper that needs to come back. So don't forget that as you think about India into 2047.
And more money for Center for Policy Research and Center for Social and Economic Progress.
Absolutely. and it will.
And you asked how to get there, so I wrote a paper for you. It's called Third Generation Strategy for Accelerated Growth and Development in India, Need for Government Strength and Institutional Development.
Thank you very much. The best kind of discussions are the ones where the panelists talk to each other. So really, thank you. We did not discuss the most important part, which is digitalization, where India is leading the world in digital public goods. And we're going to save that for another discussion. But thank you all very much. We've got lots of ideas, and I hope the audience does too, about how to take India to its dream position in 2047. And thank you very much, Indian Diaspora, Vikram, Yamini, and Rakesh. Thank you. Thanks.